When you first started saying, hey, the guy Donald Trump should not be leading our country or our party, were you surprised that at the vitriol that was directed at you?
No, because that's what he does. I mean, look, he's built a cult. He's really built a cult of personality. And when you go after the leader of a cult, it's almost like going after somebody's religion, because this is what they have taken. Everything they do is built on this idea that Donald Trump's gonna save America. So
Before we dive in, smash that like button and subscribe, because trust me, you don't want to miss this one. Donald Trump just got body slammed with words, and let's just say he is not taking it well. Former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger just tore into Trump, comparing him to a pro wrestling character, except without the muscles, charisma, or actual toughness. He roasted Trump as being softer than a microwaved marshmallow, with a tough guy act faker than a reality show stunt. If there's one thing Trump has perfected, it's looking like the biggest, baddest guy in the room, at least on camera. He spent years building a brand as the billionaire genius who always wins, the fearless titan who never backs down. But Kinzinger just shattered that illusion.
Despite Trump's personal attacks against you and promises of retribution, not to mention many death threats that you have received since you have been speaking out, you say that you have zero fear of Donald Trump. Why?
Look,
how, I should say.
I've been to war, okay? Donald Trump, I'm not trying to just be partisan shots here. He is a small, weak man who is scared to death of people. He's scared to death of strong people. And so for me, I refuse to be intimidated.
And for a while, the act worked. The gold-plated towers, the apprentice boardroom, the slow-motion escalator entrance, it all screamed power. He sold the image of a self-made mogul, a man who bulldozed his way to the top through sheer dominance. Never mind the bankruptcies, never mind the unpaid contractors, never mind that his self-made success began with a very generous multi-million-dollar boost from Daddy Fred. The myth was what mattered, and for a long time, the myth was airtight.
The Republican Party is no longer conservative. It has switched its allegiance from the principles that gave it purpose to a man whose only purpose is himself. Donald Trump is a weak man pretending to be strong. He is a small man pretending to be big. He's a faithless man.
Of course, the secret sauce wasn't actual strength, it was spectacle. Trump never had to be a tough guy, he just had to look like one. He understood that if you repeat something loud enough and long enough, people will start to believe it. His entire political rise played out like a professional wrestling promo, always hyping up a larger-than-life character. He wasn't just a candidate, he was the ultimate showman. Every moment, a headline. Every insult, a catchphrase. Every debate, a reality TV feud. And for a while, the act worked. But now, the mask is slipping.
Look, if Donald Trump gets the Republican nomination, there are many of us that will move heaven and earth to ensure he doesn't win. I think that's the most important, that he cannot be president again.
And people bought it, especially those who craved a straight-shooting, no-nonsense leader who didn't play by the rules. The carefully crafted tough guy persona made him seem untouchable, the kind of leader who could bulldoze the political establishment and restore America to some imagined glory days. Never mind that his so-called toughness mostly meant yelling at reporters, mocking disabled people, and rage tweeting at 3 a.m. to his followers. He was a warrior, but here's the thing, this persona only worked in controlled environments. On stage, at his rallies, under the roar of his adoring crowd, he was invincible. Anywhere else, the cracks in the scenes, the story was very different. The so-called alpha male constantly fished for praise, needed cue cards to remember basic empathy, and spent more time glued to cable news than actually running the country. But his greatest trick? Convincing people that his wealth and business success were proof of his power. In reality, the Trump empire was built on smoke and mirrors, inflated valuations, failed ventures, and a long history of dodging financial disasters just in time. For a man who spent years branding himself as the toughest, smartest, strongest leader the world had ever seen, he sure had a lot of moments that suggested otherwise. Fast forward a few decades, and his discomfort around actual tough guys became even more obvious. There he was, standing next to real blue-collar workers, the kind of people he claimed to champion. You could practically see the internal panic. These were men who built things with their hands, who came home with grease on their clothes and sore backs. And there was Trump gripping a hard hat like it might bite him, clearly unfamiliar with the concept of manual labor. It had the same energy as a rich kid forced to work a summer job by his parents. Awkward, disconnected, and just a little bit afraid.
And as a military guy, I've always respected strength in leadership. And Trump is the opposite of that. He's a whiny, weak, small, tiny man who is scared to death.
Then came the infamous handshakes. Oh, the handshakes. In Trump's mind, a handshake wasn't just a greeting, it was a power move, a chance to assert dominance. But the execution, a bizarre mix of yanking, squeezing, and refusing to let go, as if he thought he could physically drag someone into submission. Strong leaders command respect naturally. Trump, on the other hand, looked like he was trying to win an arm wrestling contest with heads of state. And sometimes it backfired spectacularly, like when French President Emmanuel Macron gripped back with enough force to turn the whole thing into a passive-aggressive power struggle. But perhaps the biggest tell of all, his desperate need for loyalty. Real strength doesn't demand constant validation, it earns it. Yet Trump spent an embarrassing amount of time whining about people not being loyal enough. Cabinet members, former allies, even his own vice president. Anyone who dared to disagree instantly became an enemy. And the man who bragged about toughness? He sure seemed fragile whenever someone hit him with a little truth. Because that's the thing, his entire tough guy act was never built for the real world. It worked because everyone was in on the act. The punches didn't land, the rivalries were scripted, and at the end of the day, even the most vicious enemies shook hands backstage. But what happens when someone tries to bring that same fake bravado into actual leadership? Well, we've all seen the answer.
There are other Republicans who are not speaking out who feel this way.
Oh, there's so many of them. And that's the thing is like, you know, people will tell me sometimes like, Adam, you're courageous. And I appreciate it. I'm not courageous though. I'm surrounded by cowards. So
Trump's version of strength was never about resilience or real grit. It was about spectacle. Inside the safety of his own rallies, he could stand at the podium, point at journalists, and call them the enemy. He could mock opponents, dish out schoolyard nicknames, and slap his name on anything that stood still long enough. But take him out of that controlled environment? Suddenly, the tough guy act started looking flimsy. A real leader doesn't need a hype crowd to function. Trump, on the other hand, treated every joke, every fact check, every mild rebuke like a steel chair to the face. Late night hosts mocked him. Instead of brushing it off, he rage tweeted in the middle of the night. A former ally criticized him. Suddenly they were weak, washed up, or disloyal. The man couldn't handle a joke without threatening legal action. But sure, alpha male energy. And then there were the interviews, the real world equivalent of stepping into the ring with an actual fighter. And let's just say, he didn't exactly come out swinging.
Crying Adam Kinzinger, he's a super crying. I never saw the guy not crying, he's always crying. I looked at him, I remember years ago he was actually on my side. And then one day, you know, when you don't want to kill people in wars, they turn it.
But nothing exposed the gap between the act and reality, quite like an actual crisis. When the moment called for leadership, Trump gave us rambling press conferences, Sharpie-edited weather maps, and bizarre rants about his personal grievances, right in the middle of national emergencies. Under the bright lights of WWE-style rallies, he could sell the illusion of dominance. But when faced with a pandemic, mass protests, or rising international tensions, the bravado vanished. He wasn't the guy throwing people through tables. He was the guy hiding behind the curtain, waiting for someone else to handle it. And then came the moment that shattered the illusion completely. Adam Kinzinger, a former Republican congressman and military veteran, delivered the kind of takedown that even Trump's usual bravado couldn't mask. It wasn't just an insult, it was a direct hit to the one thing Trump clings to the most. the myth of his toughness. Because for all the bluster, all the posturing, all the red meat rally speeches about strength and dominance, Kinzinger said what many had long suspected. Trump's entire tough guy act was just that, an act. And this one stung in a way the others hadn't. Trump could handle being called a liar. He practically turned it into a job requirement. Accusations of corruption, he'd been dodging those for decades, but being called weak? That was different. That was personal. This was the guy who spent his entire career trying to convince the world he was the ultimate alpha male. The master deal maker, the one who alone could fix it. And now, a fellow Republican had pulled back the curtain and exposed what was really there. Not a fearless leader, not a tough guy, just a man more obsessed with looking strong than actually being strong. And of course, Trump reacted exactly how you'd expect. Full meltdown mode. The all-caps social media rants came rolling in, packed with wild insults, conspiracy theories, and his usual greatest hits, loser. Reno was failed congressman. But here's the thing, he never actually responded to the substance of what Kinzinger said. Not once did he explain why he wasn't the soft, whiny caricature Kinzinger painted him as. Because how could he? What was he going to do? Prove he wasn't thin-skinned by throwing another tantrum? The irony was too rich to ignore. A man who built his image on strength, toughness, and dominance was now losing his mind. Because someone pointed out he wasn't actually any of those things. It was like watching a guy who swears he's the fastest runner alive trip over his own shoelaces in the middle of a race. And the public, oh, they noticed.
Man in shame. I mean, it's like, you know, it's not, I don't know if it's diaper, if it's like.
You don't think it's the face, that whatever he's putting on his face?
Could be the face, could be the
sweat mixed with that, yeah.
The sweat. Here's the important thing about this, Tim, is MAGA sees Donald Trump. Now, we've got to put ourselves in this mind for a second, as almost a non-human entity. And I'm serious about this. Like, he is, everything about him is almost non-human. Like, honestly, if they saw him sitting on the toilet, it would shatter their...
Even some of Trump's most loyal supporters had to admit, this one hit differently. The usual defenses didn't hold up. You couldn't just yell fake news when the guy calling him out was a fellow conservative. You couldn't scream liberal. Bias when the criticism came from someone who'd been in the same party trenches for years. And when Trump's response boiled down to nothing more than playground level name calling, it only made Kinzinger's point even clearer. For the first time, people weren't just hearing the criticism, they were seeing it, not just suspecting it, but truly seeing the cracks in the armor, the desperation behind the bluster, the reality that maybe, just maybe, the so-called strong man wasn't so strong after all. And just like that, the internet did what it does best. Took Kinzinger's roast, slapped on a few captions, and turned it into a digital masterpiece.
Didn't ask for a pardon. It was preemptive just in case Trump's Justice Department goes after you and other members of the January 6th committee. What was your reaction when you saw Trump's post last night declaring your preemptive pardon void and vacant?
Well, first off, I'm trying to figure out what he's trying to distract from, because that's what all this is, always a distraction to try to get people's attention, or maybe he hasn't felt like he's got enough attention. But look, Jake, it's like...
Within minutes, Twitter was flooded with memes, reaction videos, and edits that made Trump's meltdown even funnier than it already was. Because when the internet senses weakness, it doesn't just point it out, it turns it into a full-blown spectacle. Then came the reaction videos. And did it stop anyone from poking fun at Trump's legendary inability to walk down a ramp? Absolutely not. Let's talk about the internet's memory, because if there's one thing Trump's never fully grasped, it's that the internet never forgets. Every single one of his weakest moments got dragged back into the spotlight. The umbrella struggle, the golf cart fiasco, and just like that, the invincible image took another hit. Not from a knockout punch, but from 1,000 tiny humiliating jabs. That's how it always happens. It's not the grand scandals or dramatic exposés that break the myth. It's the viral moments, the ones that get shared to oblivion and slowly chip away at the larger-than-life persona that's been so carefully constructed.
Rory, let's just start by pulling up this tweet from the former congressman. He said, "I'm genuinely surprised how people close to Trump haven't talked about the odor. It's truly something to behold. Wear a mask if you can." And wouldn't you know it, he's not the first person to levy this accusation against the former president.
For Trump, whose entire brand is built on the illusion of strength, perception is everything. The tough guy act, the billionaire genius routine, the only I can fix it nonsense. It all starts to crumble the second people stop believing in it. That's why moments like this matter. It's not just about a single roast from a former congressman. It's about the slow, steady erosion of an image that was never built on substance to begin with. And here's the real kicker. This bothers him more than policy failures, more than legal troubles, more than actual crises. Nothing gets under Trump's skin like being made to look weak. He doesn't just want to win, he wants to be seen as a winner. He doesn't just want power, he wants admiration. The idea that people are laughing at him, that he's the punchline instead of the one delivering it, that's his worst nightmare.
For what they did,
Yeah.
honestly, they should go to jail.
So you think Liz Cheney should go to jail?
For what they did.
Everyone on the committee, you think
I think
should go to
everybody
jail?
anybody that voted in favor.
Are you going to direct your FBI director and
No,
your attorney general to send them to
No,
jail?
not at all. I think that they'll have to look at that.
No, I have absolutely no worries about this. First off, the executive branch can't go after the legislative branch because we embarrassed him. That's not a sin. That's not against the law. Ultimately, when we talked about him throwing his ketchup and hamburger against the wall, there's nothing illegal about that. And most of the people that testified were actually his Republicans, fellow Republicans that went up and spoke in him. So look, he's all butthurt right now because he was embarrassed. He's not going to come after us, and I'm not worried about it at all.
The irony, of course, is that true strength isn't about avoiding mockery. It's about how you handle it. The best leaders don't panic over a joke. They don't spiral into rage posts because someone bruised their ego. They certainly don't spend days trying to convince the internet that they're actually very strong and powerful. But Trump, he can't help himself. He's trapped in a never-ending cycle of image control, and ironically, it's always his own worst enemy. That's why every time one of these viral moments happens, it matters. Because it's not just a joke, it's a mirror. A reminder that the emperor has no clothes. And worse, that everyone can see it. That's the real power of moments like this. Not that they make Trump mad, but that they expose what's always been true. Strength isn't about bravado, it's about how you handle the hits. No matter how loud he yells, how many insults he throws, or how many all caps posts he fires off at 3 a.m., one thing is clear. This is a man who cannot take a hit. And now, the inevitable question, what's next?
On Trump's victory, I'm just curious now on this Sunday night how you see his return to power shaping this country's future.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was a resounding victory, and I think, to some extent, that's actually a good thing because now they're going to have an opportunity to put their vision in place. I mean, we've been talking about what is, Trump's vision for years now. And they're going to have to own whatever that is, this idea.
Because if there's one thing predictable about Trump, it's that he hates being the punchline. So will we see the classic comeback attempt? A rally speech where he puffs out his chest, throws in a few sad and fake news rants, and convinces the crowd that he's the real victim here? Probably. Will it work? Not so much. Of course, his supporters will rush to defend him. There will be breathless declarations that he's still the strongest, still the alpha male, still the one to fear. But even they can't ignore the cracks forming, because once the spell starts to break, it doesn't really go back together.
Trump once included you on a list of people he said, in his words, should be going to jail for your role in the January 6th committee. What do you think about these threats to go after former officials or current officials, political enemies, if you will, that he's made? Because he made them a lot. And now suddenly his allies have been telling us on this show, well, we don't know that it's going to go that far. What do you think?
Well, look, I mean, it's very anti-democratic to do that. It's very authoritarian to make those threats. So I hope they don't do it. Let me say this, though. I have 0.0% fear of.
Remember when Trump used to boast about being the strongest, smartest, and most adored man in any room? Well, Adam Kinzinger just ripped that image apart, exposing him as nothing more than a weak, tantrum-throwing diva. And judging by Trump's furious response, Kinzinger definitely struck a nerve. So what exactly did he say that set the internet on fire? Let's dive in.